The night was quiet, but the air inside the hospital buzzed with an undercurrent of urgency. Dr. Marcus Taylor, a well-respected surgeon known for his precision and unshakable composure, stood in the ER, reviewing a patient's chart. The tall, confident figure in his pristine white coat was a calming presence, even during the most chaotic moments. Marcus had built a career on saving lives, navigating the fragility of human existence with steady hands and a compassionate heart. But tonight, fate had a plan for him that would test his resolve in ways he could never have imagined. The ambulance screeched to a halt outside, and the paramedics rushed in, carrying a young girl who couldn't have been more than 10 years old. Her face was pale, her breathing shallow, and her head was heavily bandaged. She clung to life as if by a thread, and her wide, frightened eyes darted around the room. Marcus immediately sprang into action, his instincts kicking in as he took command of the situation. He bent down to the stretcher, speaking softly to reassure her, even as his team prepped her for emergency surgery. The girl, whose name he would later learn was Lily, had been in a severe car accident. Alone and with no family immediately available, she was just another patient in desperate need of help. But something about her struck Marcus deeply. He couldn't quite explain it, but there was a tug in his chest, a sense of familiarity that he quickly brushed aside to focus on the task at hand. This was his job, and he had no time for distractions. As Marcus led the team through the surgery, his focus was absolute. Hours passed in what felt like minutes as he worked meticulously to stabilize her injuries. His hands, guided by years of experience, moved with precision, but the strange feeling lingered, a subtle yet persistent whisper that made him pause for a fraction of a second as he looked down at Lily's fragile form. Was it her eyes, her features, or something intangible that connected them in a way he couldn't yet understand? When the surgery ended, Marcus stepped out into the waiting area, his exhaustion tempered by relief. Lily had pulled through, but her recovery would be slow and uncertain. He took a deep breath, allowing himself a rare moment of vulnerability as he glanced back through the glass, watching her tiny figure lying motionless in the hospital bed. It was then that a nurse approached him with a puzzled expression, holding a small locket that had been found among Lily's belongings. Inside the locket was a photo, a woman Marcus had not seen in over a decade. His heart stopped as he stared at the picture, the face from his past staring back at him like a ghost. It was Sarah, his college sweetheart, the woman who had disappeared from his life without a trace. He remembered her laugh, the way her eyes sparkled when she spoke about her dreams, and the heartbreak he felt when she left without saying goodbye. Questions flooded his mind. What was Sarah's connection to this little girl? Why had her picture been tucked away in Lily's locket? And why did Lily's eyes seem to mirror something so familiar, something that reached into the deepest corners of his soul? Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't a coincidence. There was a story here, one that he wasn't ready for but couldn't ignore. As the night wore on, Marcus found himself drawn to Lily's bedside. The machines beeped softly, a rhythm that filled the room with a fragile sense of life. He sat down, his large hands gently clasping hers, and whispered words of encouragement, even though she was still unconscious. He told himself he was simply doing his duty, but deep down, he knew there was more to this moment. Meanwhile, the hospital staff tried to locate Lily's family, but the trail was frustratingly cold. The accident had left no immediate leads, and the locket was the only clue. Marcus couldn't help but feel an overwhelming responsibility for her, a pull that went beyond professional obligation. He had no answers, only a growing sense of urgency to uncover the truth. As the hours turned into the early morning, Marcus couldn't sleep. He stared at the locket on his desk, the image of Sarah burning into his memory. Could it be possible? Was there a chance that this little girl, this fragile, innocent child, was connected to him in a way he had never anticipated? And if so, what did that mean for his life, his past, and the choices that had led him here? Just as he began to drift into the haze of unanswered questions, a knock on his office door startled him. It was a social worker, her expression serious yet hesitant. She held a file in her hands, one that she said might shed some light on Lily's background. Marcus's heart raced as he reached for it, knowing that whatever was inside could change everything. The story was far from over, but the weight of the moment pressed heavily on him. He glanced once more at the photo in the locket, then at the file in his hands. The answers he sought were within reach, but was he ready to face them? As the tension mounted, Marcus knew one thing for certain: his life was about to take a turn he could never have foreseen, and nothing would ever be the same again. The file in Marcus's hands felt heavier than it should have, as though it carried the weight of answers he wasn't sure he was ready to confront. He hesitated for a moment, his fingers brushing over the edges of the folder before finally opening it. Inside were sparse details, fragments of a life that seemed as fragile and incomplete as Lily's current state. There were no immediate mentions of family or next of kin, just her first name, Lily, and a few vague notes about her being found alone in the car wreck. The lack of information only deepened the mystery. Marcus closed the file, leaning back in his chair as he tried to process everything. His mind was a swirl of questions and memories, particularly of Sarah. She had been the love of his life once, and though their time together had been brief, it had been intense and unforgettable. He remembered the way they used to dream about the future, imagining a life together filled with possibilities. But that dream had been cut short when Sarah disappeared, leaving behind only silence and unanswered questions. Now, years later, her face in the locket was like a ghost from his past, tying her somehow to this little girl. The thought lingered in his mind as he returned to Lily's bedside. She looked so small and vulnerable, her head wrapped in bandages, her tiny chest rising and falling with the assistance of the machines. Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her than met the eye. Her features, though delicate, seemed to spark a faint sense of recognition deep within him. He had never been one to believe in fate or destiny, but something about this moment felt too significant to be mere coincidence. As he sat by her side, memories of Sarah continued to surface. He remembered the day they met, a chance encounter at a coffee shop where the conversation had quickly turned into an hours-long exchange of ideas and dreams. Sarah had been full of life, her passion for art and adventure infectious. Marcus, who had always been more grounded and focused on his studies, found himself captivated by her free spirit. They had been an unlikely pair, but their connection had been undeniable. He thought back to the last time he saw her, the day she told him she needed space. She hadn't explained much, only that she had to leave and couldn't say why. Marcus had been devastated, but he respected her decision, thinking perhaps she would return someday. She never did, and he had spent years burying the pain, focusing instead on his career and the lives he could save as a doctor. But now, with Lily lying in the hospital bed, that old wound felt fresh again, as though time had folded in on itself and brought the past back to confront him. Meanwhile, the hospital staff continued their search for Lily's family. Calls were made to nearby towns and local authorities, but no one seemed to know who she was or where she had come from. The social worker, who had been kind but firm, mentioned that if no relatives were found soon, Lily might have to be placed in foster care. The idea didn't sit well with Marcus. He couldn't explain why, but the thought of her being taken away to an unknown fate filled him with unease. He felt a responsibility for her, a connection that he couldn't yet define. The days that followed were a blur of medical updates and unanswered questions. Lily remained unconscious, her small body fighting to heal. Marcus found himself spending more and more time by her side, even when his shifts were over. He told himself it was because she had no one else, but deep down, he knew it was more than that. There was an unspoken bond forming, one that he couldn't ignore. One evening, as he sat in his office, a nurse knocked on the door and handed him a small envelope. This was with her belongings, she said, her voice soft. Marcus took the envelope and opened it, revealing a piece of paper folded neatly inside. It was a note, written in a hurried hand, with just a few words. "Take care of her. She's special." There was no signature, no indication of who had written it. The message only deepened the mystery, raising more questions than it answered. Marcus stared at the note for a long time, trying to make sense of it. Who had written it? And why had they left Lily alone in such a vulnerable state? He couldn't shake the feeling that someone somewhere knew the truth about her and had deliberately kept it hidden. The thought both intrigued and unsettled him. In the days that followed, Marcus tried to focus on his other patients, but his thoughts kept drifting back to Lily. Each time he saw her, he felt that unexplainable connection grow stronger. The pieces of the puzzle were scattered, but he was determined to put them together. He found himself wondering about Sarah, about what had happened to her after she left. Could she have had a child? Could Lily be her daughter? And if so, what did that mean for him? The questions haunted him, keeping him awake at night as he replayed every memory he had of Sarah, searching for clues he might have missed. He thought about the way she used to talk about wanting a family someday, about her dreams of traveling the world and finding her place in it. Had she found that place without him? And if Lily was her daughter, why was she here alone, with no one to claim her? As the days turned into weeks, Lily began to show signs of improvement. Her color returned, and her breathing grew stronger. The first time she opened her eyes, Marcus was there, his heart pounding as he watched her gaze around the room, trying to make sense of her surroundings. When her eyes finally met his, there was a moment of recognition, brief but undeniable. She didn't speak, but the look in her eyes said more than words ever could. Marcus felt a surge of emotion, a mix of relief and something deeper, something he couldn't yet name. But the mystery was far from over. The questions surrounding Lily's identity and her connection to Sarah remained unanswered, and Marcus knew he couldn't rest until he uncovered the truth. As he sat by her bedside, holding her hand, he made a silent promise to her and to himself. He would find the answers, no matter what it took. And in doing so, he might just find the closure he had been seeking for years. The journey ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges he couldn't yet foresee. But Marcus was determined to face it head-on, driven by a sense of purpose that went beyond his role as a doctor. This was personal, and he wouldn't stop until he understood the full story behind the little girl who had come into his life and changed everything. The days following Lily's awakening brought more questions than answers. She was timid and quiet, her wide eyes scanning the unfamiliar hospital room as though searching for something or someone. Marcus tried to ease her into small conversations, asking her about things like her favorite color or what she liked to eat, but she answered only in brief, guarded whispers. It was as if she had learned to protect herself from the world, and Marcus couldn't blame her. Whatever had happened to her before the accident had clearly left its mark. In the meantime, James, the investigator, had begun piecing together what little information they had. The locket, the note, and the fragments of memories Marcus had shared about Sarah were all he had to work with. "It's not much," James admitted during one of their phone calls, but sometimes it's the smallest details that lead to the biggest breakthroughs. "I'll let you know as soon as I find something." As Marcus hung up the phone, he felt the weight of the unknown pressing down on him. His connection to Lily felt undeniable now. It was more than just a doctor's responsibility to his patient. There was something deeper, something almost primal that he couldn't explain. He found himself drawn to her in a way that made him question everything he thought he knew about his life. One evening, as he sat by Lily's bed, she finally broke her silence with a question that caught him off guard. "Do you know my mom?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. He hesitated, unsure how to answer. "Why do you ask, Lily?" he replied, keeping his tone gentle. She looked down at her hands, fiddling with the edge of her blanket. "You remind me of her," she said softly. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Marcus wanted to ask her more, but she retreated into silence again, leaving him to wrestle with the growing suspicion that the connection between them was more profound than he had dared to believe. Meanwhile, the hospital staff continued their efforts to identify Lily's family. The local authorities had circulated her photo, and calls had been made to nearby schools and community centers, but no one seemed to recognize her. It was as if she had appeared out of nowhere. Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that someone was deliberately hiding her identity, and he began to wonder if the car accident that brought her to the hospital was truly an accident at all. One night, Marcus was reviewing Lily's medical file when he noticed something strange. Her blood type didn't match the one listed in the preliminary report from the accident scene. It wasn't uncommon for errors to occur in the chaos of emergency care, but this discrepancy nagged at him. He decided to run the tests again, just to be sure. When the results came back, they confirmed his suspicion. The blood type listed in the original report wasn't hers. It was a small detail, but it raised a troubling question. Was the information in the report accurate at all? And if not, what else had been falsified? Marcus shared his concerns with James, who immediately saw the potential significance. If the report was tampered with, someone might be trying to cover their tracks, James said. This could be bigger than we thought. The investigator's words sent a chill down Marcus's spine. He had been so focused on Lily's well-being that he hadn't considered the possibility that she might be in danger. As James delved deeper into the case, Marcus found himself growing more protective of Lily. He began to notice subtle changes in her demeanor, moments when she seemed to let her guard down, revealing glimpses of the child she was beneath the layers of fear and uncertainty. One afternoon, she smiled for the first time since her arrival, and it was like a ray of sunlight breaking through a storm. Marcus felt an overwhelming sense of joy, but it was tempered by the knowledge that her past still loomed over them like a dark cloud. The mystery took another turn when James called with an update. "I found something," he said, his voice laced with urgency. "The locket. It's not just a trinket. It's custom-made, and there's a serial number engraved on the clasp. I traced it back to a jeweler who specializes in one-of-a-kind pieces. The locket was purchased about 7 years ago by a woman named Sarah Andrews." Marcus felt a surge of emotion at the mention of Sarah's name. It was a confirmation of what he had suspected all along, but it also raised more questions. Why had Sarah given the locket to Lily, and where was she now? James continued, "There's more. Sarah filed a missing persons report around the same time she bought the locket. She was looking for someone, a child, I think. The details are vague, but it's possible she was searching for Lily." Marcus's mind raced as he tried to make sense of the information. If Sarah had been searching for Lily, did that mean she wasn't Lily's mother? Or had something happened to separate them? As the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, Marcus couldn't ignore the possibility that Lily might be his daughter. The timeline fit, and the connection he felt to her was too strong to dismiss as coincidence. But he needed more proof, something definitive that would confirm the truth. He decided to run a DNA test, knowing it was the only way to get the answers he needed. The results would take time, and in the meantime, Marcus threw himself into his work, trying to keep his mind off the growing tension. But it was impossible to ignore the bond that had formed between him and Lily. She had started calling him Dr. Marcus, her voice tinged with a warmth that melted his heart. He found himself imagining what life might be like if she were his daughter, if the family he had longed for but never thought he would have could become a reality. But the closer he got to the truth, the more dangerous the situation became. One evening, as he was leaving the hospital, he noticed a car parked across the street with its headlights off. It had been there the night before as well, and Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him. He mentioned it to James, who promised to look into it, but the incident left Marcus on edge. Back in the hospital, Lily continued to make progress. She was walking now, her steps tentative but determined. Marcus marveled at her resilience, her ability to find strength in the face of so much uncertainty. But he knew that her recovery was only the beginning. The secrets of her past were still unraveling, and with each new revelation, the stakes grew higher. The mystery surrounding Lily's identity, the connection to Sarah, and the ominous presence of the car outside the hospital all pointed to a larger story, one that Marcus was only beginning to uncover. As he sat by Lily's bed that night, watching her sleep, he felt a mix of hope and fear. The answers he sought were within reach, but he knew that finding them would come at a cost. The journey was far from over, and the most challenging chapters were yet to come. The air around Marcus felt heavier with each passing day. The DNA results were still pending, and while he tried to stay patient, the tension was unbearable. Every glance at Lily's delicate features and every moment she reached out to hold his hand fueled a sense of urgency within him. He knew that the answers were close, but the questions still swirled in his mind like an unrelenting storm. Who was she to him, and what had brought her into his life in such a heartbreaking and mysterious way? Lily, too, seemed to sense that something was happening. Though her spirits had lifted slightly and she smiled more often, there was a lingering shadow in her eyes. At times, she would stare out the hospital window as if expecting someone to walk through the door and take her away. Marcus caught her doing it one afternoon and asked gently, "Lily, what are you looking for?" She hesitated, her small fingers clutching the edge of the hospital blanket, before whispering, "I don't know, but I feel like I'm waiting for something." Her words lingered in Marcus's mind, long after she had fallen asleep that night. He couldn't shake the feeling that her life before the accident had been filled with unanswered questions, just as his had been since Sarah disappeared all those years ago. The parallels between them were impossible to ignore. Marcus had spent nearly a decade haunted by the thought of what could have been, and now, as he sat beside Lily, he wondered if life was giving him a second chance to fill the void that had consumed him. Meanwhile, James continued his investigation, but the closer he got to the truth, the more resistance he faced. The car parked outside the hospital had returned several times, and it wasn't long before James confirmed that it was no coincidence. "Someone's watching you, Marcus," he warned over the phone. "I don't know who they are yet, but they're connected to Lily somehow. We need to be careful." The warning sent a chill through Marcus. He became hyper-aware of his surroundings, noticing every unfamiliar face and every unmarked car near the hospital. His once routine commute home now felt like a game of cat and mouse, with Marcus constantly checking his rearview mirror for signs of pursuit. He knew that whoever was watching them wasn't there out of curiosity. They had a purpose, and Marcus feared it wasn't a good one. One evening, as Marcus was leaving the hospital, he saw a man in a dark coat standing near the entrance. The man wasn't looking at him directly, but something about his presence felt wrong. Marcus's instincts told him to stay calm, so he walked to his car as usual, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being followed. He drove home, taking a circuitous route to ensure he wasn't being tailed, and once he arrived, he locked the door behind him and double-checked all the windows. The unease followed him into his dreams that night. He dreamed of Sarah, standing in a field of wildflowers with a child by her side. The child's face was obscured, but Marcus knew it was Lily. He tried to run toward them, but no matter how fast he moved, the distance between them never closed. He woke up in a cold sweat, the image of Sarah and Lily etched into his mind. The next day, James called with news that sent Marcus's heart racing. "I found a connection," James said. "There's a man named Victor who's been linked to Sarah's disappearance. He's a dangerous guy, someone you don't want to cross, and he's been asking questions about Lily." The name struck a chord with Marcus. He remembered Sarah mentioning a Victor once, years ago, but the details were vague. "What does he want with Lily?" Marcus asked, his voice tense. James hesitated before answering. "I think Lily might be the key to something he's been hiding. Whatever it is, he doesn't want her to remember." The revelation raised the stakes in a way Marcus hadn't anticipated. Lily wasn't just a lost child. She was at the center of a web of secrets that extended far beyond anything Marcus could have imagined. And now, with Victor closing in, Marcus knew they were running out of time. As the days passed, the hospital became a fortress of sorts, with Marcus keeping a watchful eye over Lily at all times. He couldn't bear the thought of her being taken away or harmed, and he vowed to protect her no matter what. But the tension was beginning to take its toll on both of them. Lily grew quieter, her once timid smiles fading into an expression of worry that broke Marcus's heart. He wanted to tell her everything, to explain what was happening, but he knew it would only scare her more. The DNA results finally arrived, but before Marcus could open the envelope, James called with an urgent message. "Victor knows where she is," James said. "He's coming for her, Marcus. We need to act fast." Marcus felt a surge of adrenaline as he hung up the phone. He glanced at the envelope in his hand, knowing that the answers it contained would change everything. But there was no time to dwell on it now. Protecting Lily was all that mattered. He rushed to her room, finding her sitting on the bed with her favorite stuffed animal clutched tightly in her arms. "Lily," he said, kneeling in front of her, "we need to go. It's not safe here." Her eyes widened with fear, but she nodded, trusting him completely. Marcus quickly gathered her things and led her out of the hospital through a side exit, avoiding the main entrance where he feared Victor might be waiting. His heart pounded as he scanned the parking lot, looking for any sign of danger. The car he had seen before was nowhere in sight, but Marcus knew better than to let his guard down. As they drove away, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every car on the road seemed suspicious, every turn a potential ambush. Lily sat silently in the back seat, her wide eyes fixed on the world outside. Marcus wished he could reassure her, but the truth was, he didn't know what was going to happen next. The tension reached a boiling point when Marcus noticed a black SUV following them. He tried to stay calm, taking random turns in an attempt to lose the vehicle, but it stayed close, its headlights a constant presence in his rearview mirror. "Hold on, Lily," Marcus said, his voice trembling slightly as he pressed down on the accelerator. The SUV sped up to match their pace, and Marcus's heart raced as he realized they were out of options. He needed to find a safe place to stop and call for help, but the streets were dark and deserted, offering no sanctuary. Lily clutched her stuffed animal tighter, her small voice breaking the silence. "Are we going to be okay, Dr. Marcus?" Her question cut through the chaos like a knife, filling Marcus with a determination he hadn't felt in years. "Yes, Lily," he said firmly, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. "I promise, I'll keep you safe." But even as he said the words, the SUV drew closer, its intentions clear. Marcus knew the next moments would determine everything, their safety, their future, and the truth about who they really were to each other. The climax of their journey was at hand, and there was no turning back. The SUV loomed closer, its headlights glaring like twin eyes locked onto its prey. Marcus tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his mind racing as he scanned the road ahead. There had to be a way out of this, a way to protect Lily and get them both to safety. The urgency in his heart surged as he noticed a narrow turnoff up ahead, barely visible in the dark. It wasn't a road he was familiar with, but it was his best shot at shaking their pursuers. Without hesitation, he swerved sharply, the tires screeching as the car veered onto the rough path. The SUV followed, its engine roaring as it closed the gap. The road ahead was a mix of uneven gravel and patches of mud, making it harder for Marcus to maintain control of the car. Lily let out a small gasp from the backseat, clutching her stuffed animal tighter. "What's happening, Dr. Marcus?" she asked, her voice trembling. "It's going to be okay, Lily," he said, but the quiver in his voice betrayed his uncertainty. "I just need you to stay low and hold on tight." She nodded, ducking down as Marcus navigated the treacherous path, his eyes darting between the road and the SUV in the rearview mirror. The vehicle was relentless, matching his every move as if whoever was inside was determined not to let them escape. Suddenly, Marcus's phone buzzed on the passenger seat. It was James. With one hand on the wheel, Marcus grabbed the phone and answered, his voice taut with urgency. "James, they're on us. I don't know who's in the SUV, but they're not backing off." James's voice was calm but firm. "Listen carefully, Marcus. I think I know what's going on. Victor's not just after Lily, he's after you too. There's more to this than we realized. I've been digging into Victor's past, and I found something you need to know." "What is it?" Marcus asked, his pulse racing as the SUV nudged the back of his car, sending a jolt through both him and Lily. Victor isn't just connected to Sarah's disappearance, James said. He's tied to a larger network, one that deals in trafficking and exploitation. I think Sarah uncovered something she wasn't supposed to, and now they're trying to erase every trace of her. Lily might be the last piece of the puzzle. Marcus's stomach dropped. The implications were staggering. You're saying this isn't just about Lily or Sarah. It's bigger than that. Yes, James replied. And you're in the middle of it now. Victor knows who you are, Marcus. He knows you're connected to Sarah, and that makes you a threat. You need to get off the grid, now. Before Marcus could respond, the SUV rammed into the back of his car again, harder this time. The impact sent the car skidding sideways, and Marcus fought to regain control. Lily let out a frightened cry, and Marcus's heart broke at the sound. He couldn't let anything happen to her. Not now, not ever. Up ahead, the road split into two directions. Marcus made a split-second decision, veering left onto an even narrower path that led into a dense forest. The branches scraped against the sides of the car as they barreled through, but the SUV stayed close behind, its driver clearly undeterred by the terrain. Marcus's mind raced as he tried to think of a way to outmaneuver them. He spotted a clearing up ahead and realized it might be his only chance. Lily, hold on tight, he said, his voice steady despite the chaos. I'm going to try something. She didn't respond, but he could see her nodding in the rearview mirror. As they approached the clearing, Marcus hit the brakes suddenly, sending the car into a controlled skid. The SUV, unable to react in time, overshot the turn and plowed into a cluster of trees. The sound of crunching metal and breaking glass echoed through the forest, and Marcus didn't waste a second. He threw the car into reverse, backing away from the wreckage, then turned around and sped off in the opposite direction. For a moment, there was silence, broken only by the sound of the car's engine and Lily's shallow breathing. Marcus glanced back at her, his heart aching at the fear in her eyes. "Are you okay, Lily?" he asked. "I think so," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Good," Marcus said, forcing a reassuring smile. "We're going to be okay." But even as he said the words, he knew their ordeal was far from over. Victor wasn't the type to give up easily, and Marcus suspected the people chasing them weren't working alone. They needed a safe place to regroup and figure out their next move. He pulled out his phone and called James again, explaining what had just happened. "You can't go back to your apartment," James said. "It's too risky. I'll send you coordinates to a safe house. It's off the grid. No one will find you there." "Thank you, James," Marcus said, his gratitude genuine. "I don't know what I'd do without you." "Just stay safe," James replied. "And Marcus, be ready for anything. This isn't over." Marcus ended the call and input the coordinates James sent him into the car's GPS. The safe house was a few hours away, deep in the countryside. It wasn't an ideal situation, but it was their best option. As they drove, Marcus tried to keep the mood light for Lily's sake, asking her about her favorite books and TV shows. She responded hesitantly at first, but eventually she began to open up, a small voice filling the car with stories about princesses and superheroes. Marcus listened intently, his heart swelling with a mix of protectiveness and admiration. Despite everything she had been through, Lily still held onto a sense of innocence and hope. It was a reminder of why he was fighting so hard to keep her safe, and why he couldn't afford to give up. But as they neared the safe house, a chilling realization struck Marcus. If Victor knew about him and Lily, what else did he know? Was the safe house truly secure, or was it another trap waiting to spring? The thought sent a shiver down his spine, but he pushed it aside. He couldn't afford to let fear dictate his actions. For Lily's sake, he had to stay strong. As they pulled into the driveway of the safe house, Marcus's unease grew. The cabin was secluded, surrounded by thick woods, but something about it felt off. He couldn't put his finger on it, but his instincts told him to be cautious. He parked the car and helped Lily out, keeping a watchful eye on their surroundings. Inside, The cabin was sparsely furnished but functional. There was a small kitchen, a living area with a fireplace, and 2 bedrooms. Marcus did a quick sweep of the space, checking for anything out of the ordinary, but everything seemed in order. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. Later that night, as Lily slept in one of the bedrooms, Marcus sat by the fireplace, his mind racing. He replayed James's words in his head, trying to piece together the puzzle that had become their lives. The more he thought about it, the more questions arose. What did Victor want with Lily? And why was he so determined to eliminate any connection to Sarah? As he sat there, lost in thought, a faint noise outside caught his attention. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was enough to set Marcus on edge. He grabbed a flashlight and moved toward the window, peering out into the darkness. The forest was still, but the unease in his chest grew. Then he saw it, a shadow moving between the trees. Someone was out there watching them. Marcus's grip on the flashlight tightened as he realized the truth. They weren't safe. Not here, not anywhere. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. The shadow outside the cabin moved again, closer this time, and Marcus's pulse quickened. He carefully put the flashlight down, not wanting to draw attention to himself, and grabbed the only thing within reach, a sturdy fire poker. His mind raced with the possibilities of who could be out there. Victor, one of his men, or was it just a random stranger? Whatever the answer, Marcus knew he couldn't take any chances. He quietly locked the bedroom door where Lily was sleeping, hoping it would give her a few extra moments of safety if things went south. A creak on the porch snapped Marcus' attention back to the immediate threat. Someone was definitely there. He positioned himself near the front door, every muscle in his body tense, ready to defend Lily at all costs. The doorknob rattled softly, followed by a faint whisper. Marcus strained to hear the words, but they were too muffled to make out. His grip on the fire poker tightened as the door swung open with a sudden, deliberate motion. To his surprise, the person stepping inside wasn't a towering thug or Victor himself. It was a petite woman with a wary expression and a trembling hand holding a flashlight. Marcus froze, confused but still on high alert. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice low but firm. The woman raised her hands defensively, her voice shaking. "Wait, don't hurt me. I'm not here to harm you. My name is Elena. I'm here to warn you." "Warn me?" Marcus asked, his skepticism evident. He didn't lower the fire poker. "Why should I believe you?" Elena stepped further into the cabin, her eyes darting nervously toward the woods outside. "Because I used to work for Victor," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know what he's capable of. He's coming for you, Marcus. You and Lily. But there's something else you need to know, something Victor doesn't want you to find out." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his tone sharp. "How do you know my name? And how do you know about Lily?" Elena hesitated, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Because I was there when it happened. When Sarah was taken," she said. "Victor told us to make it look like she vanished without a trace, but I saw what really happened. He didn't just take her, he took something from her. A secret she was keeping. And now that secret is Lily." Marcus's mind reeled. The pieces of the puzzle were finally starting to fall into place, but the picture they created was more horrifying than he could have imagined. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Lily isn't just Sarah's daughter," Elena said, her voice trembling. "She's your daughter too." The world seemed to stop for a moment as Marcus processed her words. His chest tightened, and he struggled to breathe. "That's not possible," he said, shaking his head. "Sarah and I, we never." "You didn't know," Elena interrupted gently. "But she did. She found out after you two parted ways. She tried to protect Lily, to keep her safe from Victor and his men, but they found out. That's why they took her. And now they're after you, because if the truth comes out, it could destroy everything Victor's been building." Marcus staggered back, the fire poker slipping from his grasp and clattering to the floor. His heart ached with a mix of disbelief and an overwhelming sense of responsibility. Lily wasn't just a little girl he had sworn to protect. She was his little girl, and she was in more danger than he had ever realized. Before Marcus could respond, a loud crash outside shattered the moment. Elena's eyes widened in fear. "They're here," she whispered. Marcus sprang into action, motioning for Elena to help him barricade the door. He rushed to the bedroom and scooped up Lily, who woke with a start. "What's happening?" she asked, her voice filled with fear. "It's going to be okay," Marcus said, forcing a calmness he didn't feel. "We're going to get through this." The cabin shook as someone pounded on the door, shouting threats. Marcus held Lily close, his mind racing for a plan. He couldn't let Victor take her. Not now, not ever. He glanced at Elena, who seemed just as terrified but determined. "There's a back door," she whispered. "If we're quiet, we can slip out and head for the river. It's our best chance." Marcus nodded, clutching Lily tightly as they moved toward the back of the cabin. The pounding grew louder, and Marcus knew they only had seconds before the front door gave way. He opened the back door as quietly as possible, ushering Elena and Lily outside. The cool night air stung his face, but he pressed on, determined to put as much distance as possible between them and their pursuers. They reached the riverbank, the sound of rushing water masking their footsteps. But just as Marcus thought they might have a chance, a flashlight beam cut through the darkness, landing squarely on them. A voice rang out. "There they are. Don't let them get away." Panic surged through Marcus as he realized they were surrounded. Victor's men emerged from the shadows, their expressions cold and calculating. Marcus put himself between Lily and the approaching figures, his heart pounding. "Give us the girl," one of the men demanded, "and maybe we'll let you walk away." "Over my dead body," Marcus shot back, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. Before the man could respond, a loud commotion erupted behind them. James burst onto the scene, flanked by 2 police officers. "Nobody's going anywhere," James declared, his voice firm. The officers raised their weapons, and Victor's men hesitated, clearly caught off guard. Chaos ensued as the officers moved to arrest Victor's men. James rushed to Marcus's side, his eyes filled with relief. "Are you okay?" he asked. Marcus nodded, holding Lily close. "Thanks to you." But just as the tension began to ease, a single gunshot rang out, and everyone froze. Marcus turned to see Victor himself stepping out of the shadows, a gun in his hand and a sinister smile on his face. "You think this is over?" Victor sneered. "You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into." Marcus stood his ground, his body shielding Lily. "It's over, Victor. The truth is out and you've lost." Victor laughed, the sound chilling. "You're a fool, Marcus. The truth won't save you. It won't save her." Before Victor could make another move, Elena stepped forward, her hands raised. "It's over, Victor," she said, her voice steady. "I've already sent everything to the authorities. Your network, your secrets. It's all coming down." Victor's smile faltered, and for the first time, Marcus saw fear in his eyes. Before he could react, the police officers moved in, disarming and arresting him. The nightmare was finally over. As dawn broke over the river, Marcus held Lily close, his heart full of gratitude and newfound purpose. He looked at her, tears streaming down his face. "I promise, Lily," he said softly, "I'll always protect you, no matter what." Lily smiled, her small hand clutching his. "I know, Daddy." The word hit Marcus like a tidal wave, filling him with a sense of belonging he hadn't felt in years. Despite the pain and loss, he knew they had found something precious, each other, and together they could face whatever the future held. The chaos subsided as Victor was led away in handcuffs, his smug defiance replaced by an expression of pure defeat. Marcus stood there in silence, still clutching Lily tightly, unable to let her go. The adrenaline of the night was beginning to fade, and the reality of everything that had happened started to settle in. For a moment, it was just him and Lily, the weight of the world lifting ever so slightly as he looked into her eyes. James approached cautiously, his face a mixture of relief and worry. "Marcus," he said gently, "you and Lily should come with me. The authorities will want statements, but for now, you need some rest. Both of you." Marcus nodded, the exhaustion finally catching up with him. Lily rested her head on his shoulder, her small arms wrapping around his neck as if she knew he was her safest place in the world. Back at James's place, the warmth of the space offered a stark contrast to the cold tension that had gripped them for hours. Elena sat quietly at the kitchen table, sipping on a cup of tea James had offered her. She seemed nervous, her eyes darting occasionally toward Marcus, as though unsure if her actions would be met with gratitude or suspicion. Marcus sat down across from her, Lily still nestled in his arms, now fast asleep. "I don't even know where to begin," he said, his voice low but steady. "What you did back there, you didn't have to risk yourself like that." Elena looked down at her tea, her fingers tightening around the mug. "I had to," she said softly. "I've been complicit in Victor's schemes for too long. At first, I thought I didn't have a choice, that I was just doing what I needed to survive. But then I saw the damage he was doing, the lives he was destroying. And when I realized Lily was your daughter, I couldn't stand by anymore." Her words hung in the air, heavy with sincerity and regret. Marcus studied her for a moment before nodding. "Thank you," he said simply. "You saved us tonight." Elena blinked back tears, a small but grateful smile crossing her face. Over the next few days, the pieces of their shattered lives began to come together. The authorities uncovered enough evidence to dismantle Victor's entire operation, thanks to the information Elena provided. As the investigation continued, it became clear just how far Victor's network had reached and how many lives had been affected. For Marcus, it was a bittersweet victory. Justice was being served, but it came at a steep cost. Years of Sarah's life had been stolen, and Lily had grown up without either of her parents. Marcus took some time off work to focus on Lily, wanting to build the bond they had been denied for so long. He learned about her favorite books and songs, her love for drawing, and the way she scrunched her nose when she was deep in thought, just like Sarah used to. Each day, they grew closer, and Marcus felt a profound sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. Elena, too, found her place in their new lives. She stayed in touch, offering to help in any way she could. Though her past with Victor couldn't be erased, her actions to make things right had earned her a place of trust in Marcus's eyes. She even started volunteering at a local shelter, determined to rebuild her life on a foundation of honesty and kindness. One afternoon, as Marcus and Lily walked through the park, she asked a question that caught him off guard. "Daddy, do you think Mommy's watching us from heaven?" Marcus stopped, his heart squeezing at the innocence in her voice. He knelt down to her level, taking her small hands in his. "I think she is," he said softly, "and I think she's really proud of you. Of us." Lily smiled, her eyes bright with hope. "I hope she knows I love her," she said. Marcus pulled her into a hug, his voice thick with emotion. "She knows, sweetheart. She always knew." As time went on, life began to find a new rhythm. Marcus returned to work, his colleagues welcoming him back with open arms. But he was different now, more grounded, more present. Every decision he made was with Lily in mind, and his patients noticed the change. He wasn't just a doctor anymore, he was a father, and that gave him a perspective he hadn't had before. Lily thrived in her new life, her laughter filling the spaces that had once felt empty. She made friends at school, brought home drawings that Marcus proudly displayed on the fridge, and even convinced him to adopt a stray kitten they found one rainy afternoon. "We should name her Hope," Lily said, her eyes shining. Marcus couldn't argue with that. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place on a quiet evening, months after the ordeal with Victor. Marcus was going through a box of Sarah's belongings that James had helped him retrieve from storage. Among the photos and letters was a small, worn notebook. As he flipped through it, he found entries Sarah had written during her pregnancy. Each page was filled with thoughts, hopes, and fears, but one entry stood out. I hope Marcus knows how much I still love him, she had written. And I hope one day he'll find out about Lily. She's the best thing that's ever happened to me, and I think she'll be the best thing that ever happens to him too. Tears blurred Marcus's vision as he read her words. He clutched the notebook to his chest, a bittersweet smile playing on his lips. You were right, Sarah, he whispered. She's the best thing that's ever happened to me. That night, as he tucked Lily into bed, she asked him to read her a story. He picked one of her favorites, his voice steady and warm as he brought the characters to life. Halfway through, he noticed her eyes starting to droop. He paused, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I love you, Lily, he said softly. She smiled sleepily, her voice barely above a whisper. I love you too, Daddy. As he turned off the light and closed the door, Marcus felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The journey had been long and painful, filled with loss and heartache, but it had brought him to this moment, a moment where he was exactly where he was meant to be. Life wasn't perfect, and it never would be, but it was beautiful in its imperfections. Marcus had found his purpose, his family, and his hope. And as he stood there in the quiet of the night, he knew one thing for certain: they would face whatever came next together, as father and daughter, bound by love and a second chance at life.